In this video, we are going to be dropping the transmission in this 2000 Honda Insight. This is the Gen 1, applies to 2000, 2006, and it is a very challenging job. There's not great documentation on it or videos, so I'm making this, and I hope it helps. So we'll get into it. The very first thing when you're working on this car, because it is a hybrid, is to make sure you turn off the IMA power. So what I'm doing is in the back of the car here, you just lift up on these little carpets, and I'm gonna do this with two hands, but you see underneath this guy right here, you have two 10mm bolts. All right, with the two 10mm bolts off, this is what the thing looks like. You do have this little red cover on this thing, which helps stop it from going to the other one. So you have to kind of pry up on it a bit, hopefully not break it, but it comes off just like that. Now we're going to flip this from the on position to the off position, and you can also put this thing back on just so that you don't lose it, and so this thing doesn't get bumped back on to the on position while you're working on it. And then just so we don't lose any of these screws, I'm going to put this thing back in. We are going to remove the 10mm nut on our negative terminal here, just so that we disconnect all the power from the car. And then we're going to work on removing the air cleaner box. We have a 10mm bolt there, another one right there, and then another guy right there. And there's some additional ones on the side, and one deep in there right there. I'm also going to loosen up these clamps on these hoses. I just got off the top part of this air filter thing. I used one of these little interior or whatever plastic clip separator things, and just kind of wedged it underneath and got that to come off. And I don't know what is this, but it's something. I'm going to clean that out, and I'm also going to buy a new air filter because that's looking pretty filthy. After getting off the three brass screws that were holding this thing in place, or loosening them, so this guy's loose. The only thing that's also holding it now is these three little bolts. Sorry, it's not focusing. 1, 2, and then you can see on this other side where they're at. So 1, 2, and 3, and that'll separate it from this bracket assembly. These 10mm on the side has been a huge pain in the butt. So what I did is I removed the plastic cover thing there. It was 3 10mm nuts. They look like that, and that let me have a little bit more room so that I could fit my ratchet in there. Finally got this thing out. Those were the 3 screws on the side. This is the screws on the other parts of it that we're looking at, and that is the little one that holds on this bracket for this intake hose right here. I'm going to be removing the ground straps. So this guy is a 10, and it's connected to our transmission right here. We're also going to be removing basically the starter motor. So to remove the starter motor, if we pull back this guy, there is a 12mm nut there. There's also a sensor on the starter motor itself. I'm going to remove this guy and just slide this guy off so that I'm going to pull this hose off. And to get off the starter motor, there is a 14mm bolt right here. There's another 14mm bolt right there, and you can help yourself by pushing this little tab forward like that and lifting off to get the power cable away from the starter motor. And I'll just tuck this away here. And then you can also help yourself probably by removing this little bracket right there, just so you have a little bit more clearance to get at that. These are the two 14mm bolts that came out of the starter. They're both the same size. And now that they're off, you can separate this guy off the transmission. There is one more bolt that's holding down this cable right here. So that is a 10mm that you'll have to remove. The other thing to note here is that on the starter sensor cable housing, there is this little black metal ring that's attached with a clip to it. So when you're putting this screw back on, just make sure to keep this clip on, kind of like a washer between this and the actual starter motor. And that is our starter motor. We're going to be removing the gear shift cables. So there's one right here, and then there's another one right there. And so this is an easier one to see what's happening. Basically, you've got this cotter pin that's stuck through it, and so you can bend back the two little metal wires like this. And I'm gonna try using some pliers. Needle nose pliers are probably the best things for this, but I'll work with what I have right now. There's one. And there's the other guy. Get it as well as you can to be straight. And now you can see that little loop on top. So if you come in with a pick, and you should probably wear gloves when you do this just so you don't get hurt when this thing slips. But basically we're just gonna keep on pushing this thing through. Worst case scenario, you just cut it right there and you throw a new cotter pin in place. After getting that cotter pin out, you will pull off the top piece, which is metal, and then there's a white little kind of glider plastic bit underneath that, and then finally you've got the actual rubber gear shift connector right there. So that's the order in which they come off, and now you can just pull this guy off. Now I have to try to get this guy right here, which is going to be a lot of fun. Now that we've got off the two shift cable links on our transmission, the next step here is to remove the actual bracket that holds them onto the transmission. So we've got on this bracket, you've got one 12 mil, a second 12 mil, and then a third one, which is very deep back there, but it's right there. So after we get these three guys off, we should be able to get this bracket off. Getting to this bolt was a little bit challenging, so what I did is I unclipped this gray plastic bit right here by pushing down on the tab right there and on the other side of it, and then that lets me move it over just enough so I could get my 1/2-inch drive 12 mil bit on to that nut right there. All three of the 12 mil bolts come off are the same for this guy. And now another thing to note here is that you've got this little black cable connector thing on this, which I'm just going to leave it with that guy right now. But this whole thing should step away from our transmission now. I'm undoing these two 10 mil bolts right here to get off what I believe is the clutch hydraulic line. Now that we got off this guy, I'm also going to be disconnecting what I believe is the speed sensor cable right here, and you just depress on the back of this guy and it should lift off like that. It's going to move this thing away, and then on top of that there is another cable, and I believe this is the reverse sensor, and again you just push on that and pull out. Finally, there's a 10 mil bolt right there that we're going to be taking out too, to get off this wiring harness so that we don't tear. There's another sensor cable right here on our transmission that we're going to remove by pushing down this guy and pulling up on it. Right, and now we also have this guy right here, and as you can see right here, there's this cable that's coming over, and this is the sensor for the starter motor. And so what we have to do is we have to get this cable removed. So I'm going to come in there and try to push in those two plastic feet and try to get this thing separated from it so we can then drop this. We also need to get this hydraulic line for the clutch pushed out. Just broke it. It's fine, I'll just use a paper clip or something, but yeah, you're gonna have to get this thing separated off of the bracket too. Finally, what we're gonna be doing in terms of parts is taking off this boot, which is covering up the actual clutch rod, or whatever we call it. Yeah, this guy's gonna come off. You can see this part right here. This is that clutch slave cylinder. So I'm going to try to be removing that guy. I just managed to get off the clutch slave cylinder there. So those are the two 12 mil bolts that came off. And then I pulled this boot off it, and then I tried to push whatever this ball thing is right there, the shiny thing, out of the lever or whatever you call this. So now this guy is as free as I can reasonably make it from the transmission. So underneath the car, to start getting off the covers, or what we call it, that protect the engine underneath this car, you've got on this aluminum one, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 12mm bolts. And you also have one, and there would be a second one, black popper right here. And so on the other black plastic cover, there were 4 10mm bolts. 1, 2, 3, and 4. To actually jack this car up, because now we're going to take off the 2 tires, wheels, in order to remove the CV axles from the transmission, to drop the transmission. What I did is I have these 2 little black ramp things that I drove the car up onto, and then what I did is stuck 2 2x4s onto the jack stand, and then there's a motor mount just behind the transmission on this car, and so I turned them sideways like this, so we're supporting all the car's front weight now on this thing. And I have these 2 jack stands on either side that are going to go right up onto that frame member right next to them. And so you want to be really, really careful when you do this stuff. Make sure you've always got like a fail safe. So I've still got these things here on the side of the car. This is how I'm supporting it. So you can see as I lower this jack, it's going to put all the weight back onto these 2 guys. And that's how things look now. And we've got our jack out. And just to be safe, kind of give this thing a nice little wiggle like that to see if it falls. And now what I'm going to do is, again, use my 2x4s on my jack. And I'm going to want to support the bottom of the engine right here. Here's what things look like. So 2x4s on our engine. Still got our jack stand supporting the weight of most of the car. And then I still have these guys as the failsafe. We're going to be removing our wheels, so I'm just going to come in with a flathead screwdriver, and then at the base of the H here, you just pull up on it like that. And this thing should just pop off. Okay, what we're going to do in order to remove the CV axle from our knuckle is I'm going to remove these 2 19mm bolts in addition to this 12mm bolt right here. You should do this one first so that you're not going to hurt your brake line doing this thing. But when you remove these 2 19mm bolts, you're going to be able to separate the strut from the knuckle, and that lets you wobble this thing around enough in order to push this guy all the way through. We're pushing off the CV joints now from the actual transmission. So I used a pry bar right here, picked it up at Harbor Freight, and that guy's off. And the oil will come out, assuming you have oil in your transmission. So I'm just gonna leave this drain pan here to catch it. And there's another CV joint that we're gonna be grabbing right there. And so those are the next steps, basically just shoving this guy in and pushing it off. So I am really struggling to get off the longer CV joint here on the inside. So I got it that far, but can't pull it any more than that. Finally managed to get off the longer CV joint on the passenger side of the car. The way I did it was I used my jack, flicked this up a little bit, just tried to get as much movement as I could in this thing. I still have the lower control arm on, but now that I've got this thing out, I'm gonna keep pulling this thing the rest of the way out. It's already out, I just have to pop it back a bit more, but this guy was a huge pain in the butt. So good luck if you're doing this, and we'll keep on trucking. So here is our transmission. This is the passenger side of the car. We're going to start removing the bell housing bolts that are holding the transmission block right here onto the engine block. So I'm taking off this guy. This looks like it's 12 or 14. That guy right there. And then there's another guy way up in there. That's really bad placement. We're also going to grab this guy. And then on the other side of this engine right here, got one right here, and then there's another one, which you'll get at from the top. I think I'm gonna have to take off this thing, unfortunately, but that looks to be a 12. There's another 12 hiding all the way up there. Okay, so just got off this piece. It's actually only held in by 2 10mm bolts right there and there. So now I've got way better access at this 17mm. This has to be one of the worst ever bell housing bolts I've ever dealt with. It is very deep in there. I couldn't access it from the bottom of the engine. This is the one that is right here. And so the way I'm doing it is I have a 1/2 inch huge extension that goes underneath the cat right here. That's the O2 sensor. And then I have a little adapter joint so I can get a straight cut on that guy. And then I used that 1/2-inch breaker bar right there because it was torqued on super tight. And so that was really tough. Honestly, this took me about 30 minutes just to get this one bolt. But now finally it's coming off. Now what I'm gonna do is take off the 3 14mm nuts and bolt on the driver's side of the car to get this motor mount separated from the transmission. This is the back of the engine right there. This is the back of the transmission. And then we've got this motor mount right here. There's the wires for the electric motor coming in. There's a cat and the exhaust pipe. So there are 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. These are 14mm bolts that are going into the transmission bell housing right here. And then, so I'm gonna have to take these off somehow. The way I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna tighten up some of the bell housing bolts here to hold this thing in place. I have the engine supported right now. And I was gonna try to take off this guy, but this exhaust is in the way. So what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna take off these 2 bolts. They look to be 19mm. I'm almost ready to drop this guy. I wasn't able to completely remove the rear motor mount and get those 14mm bolts, the 4 14mm bolts that are in that connect the mount to the engine, but I did take off the 2 bolts that hold the motor mount into the frame of the car. So that guy is loose. It's not supporting anything. And the bell housing bolts, the 2 silver ones, they're the same length, are on the bottom. And you've got these brass ones up here. And now I'm gonna remove the final one right there to let this thing start separating and coming off. And so now I can just kind of wiggle this guy. I've got my hand right here. I also took off the little plastic cover here so I have better access from the side, but yeah, you can see this thing moving independently from the engine, which is great. And I'm just gonna keep on kind of gently trying to jiggle the input shaft out of the engine, and then we'll be able to get at our clutch. Okay, getting this transmission off is becoming very difficult. I've lowered the jack as much as I reasonably can. I've got separation here. The problem is that there is a rusted out dowel right there that is not wanting to budge. And so like I'm trying to wedge stuff in that, just pry it open. But yeah, this guy should come off right now. And it's not. So I might try heating that up a bit, throwing some WD-40 or PD Blaster in there. All right, that little bit of WD-40 got that rusted out dowel out of our bell housing now. So we have separated finally, or we're pretty damn close to removing our transmission from our engine. So I just to figure out what else it's snagged on right now. But hopefully this thing will be out very soon. Okay, finally got the thing out. It was very challenging. Now we can see our used up clutch. And I need to clean up this transmission oil. So if you do this job, make sure you have spare transmission oil. Otherwise, you're not gonna be able to put this back together. We're gonna have to fill in all the stuff we just lost. And then here is the transmission itself. And we've got our input shaft right there. And so I'm gonna be replacing this bearing and adding in some more lube